want to say hi to everybody who is joining us online for this presentation, What If It Is Dementia? Whether you are watching live or watching at some later time, we are glad that you're with us. It'll be a few more minutes before we begin, but stay tuned, and also welcome to those of you coming in the room right now. We will begin in about 4 minutes or so. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Good Shepherd. It is always good to see people filing in as we begin for an event like this, and also to be aware that there are some folks online watching, especially for the sake of those watching as a recording later, those guests among us. My name is Josh Hosler, and I am the rector of the Church of the Good Shepherd, the priest here. I am really glad to welcome you all here this morning. Our society...
Recording in progress.
Oh, now the recording's beginning. Very good. Thank you. Our society has cast dementia as the worst possible thing that can happen to you, a kind of vanishing. But there are other ways to think about life with dementia. Jim Russell, one of our co-presenters, has cared for family members with Alzheimer's. His mother and also his daughter, who was diagnosed with the early onset variety at the age of 52. He is currently writing a book about his experiences, and he hopes that this will serve as a resource to others. The Reverend Carol Hosler is an Episcopal priest who has served as a hospice chaplain and has a passion for seeing the image of Christ in people with dementia. Now she also wants to help churches understand how they can walk with those affected by it. Jim and Carol are both in the process of qualifying as official Alzheimer's Association presenters. This presentation will include a simple evaluation to assess possible dementia in yourself, family, or friends, using 10 recognized symptoms. You will also learn about the various types of dementia, their stages of progression, and the responsibilities of caregivers in each stage. Before we begin, I also want to give a great shout out to Bob and Gay Neal, who are running tech for us up in the sound booth, up in the choir loft, so that those of you online can also watch. And I want to remind our presenters that anytime you don't want to be heard, you can mute your microphone with the switch on the side. But also, I'm sure Bob will be looking out for you. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jim and Carol to talk with us today.
The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Oh God, we understand that you gifted us with memory, reason, and skill. And we also understand that on this earth, sometimes there are diseases that begin removing those from us. We ask that you bless us all as we continue to try to understand the phenomenon of dementias. Help us to understand those with dementia. Help us to care for those who care for folks with dementia. Help us to understand, help us to be able to see that you, Jesus Christ our Lord, is always present, all the time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. Regrettably, I have 20 years of experience as a caregiver for loved ones with dementia. I had 12 years taking care of my mother who had dementia. Not dementia, she had Alzheimer's. And I have currently 6 years of experience with my daughter who has Alzheimer's. She is in care right now, about 3 blocks from where I live, and in the terminal stage last stage of Alzheimer's. And then I have about 2 years of worry whether or not I have Alzheimer's. So that's, do I know where my screwdriver is that I was working with my cabinet earlier this week? Couldn't find it, and finally found it, but each time I couldn't do something like that, I wonder if I have it. I'm a retired community college administrator, and as Josh has said, I'm an approved volunteer educator for the Alzheimer's Association. We're going through that formal adjustment.
So I am really, really proud to be a member of the church and have my son as my priest. In case you hadn't noticed, he's a darn good one. So Jim and I met online last March. And even before...
Wait, I didn't see that in your presentation.
That wasn't in my notes. No, I surprised you with that. Even before we had our first lunch out together, my mind will wander. You know, when you go online to date, you don't say up front, I'm an Episcopal priest, you know? So it was about 3 phone calls before I thought, well, it's probably...
You wrote it in the...
I wrote it in a message. It's probably time for full disclosure, right? His immediate response was, wow, we could present Alzheimer's presentations together. We'd be a great pair. To this day, we go, where did that come from? How did he know that? But it's a privilege and an honor and a new challenge in my aging years to learn about this, and most of all, to love Jim's daughter, Lynn. I've learned so much from them. I'm convinced that faith organizations can be a huge assistance to people with dementias, their families, their caregivers. I think that churches have a unique role in wrapping their arms of love around those in their midst experiencing these things. I'm convinced of that and dedicated to preaching that. Will that preach? Will that preach? Okay. So we all worry from time to time, losing our keys and so forth. We tease each other about, oh, that's a sign, that's a sign. But how can we know? These are the questions that we will address now.
Just to give you a little bit of history about my mother, she was age 68 when she was diagnosed. She had been taking care of her parents for several years. She was a retired librarian, and we're pretty sure that her father had dementia in his last years. He was 87 years old, but it was never diagnosed for Alzheimer's or anything. It's just what happens as you get older. She lived alone, and my wife and I were working in Lansing, and we had 3 kids, and we needed help because we were both in double careers. And so we invited my mother to live with us, and she was thrilled to come up. And soon, Karen and I noticed that she had problems with memory. Something was going on. And at that stage, what I knew about Alzheimer's was 0. And so we didn't know whether it was medications or whether or not it was just aging, normal senility, whether or not she was drinking. She had an apartment behind us. We didn't know whether or not it was the confusion. We had no idea. The kids knew something was really wrong because she could drive only with their assistance. My kids were between 10 and 15, and they had to tell her not to go through red lights and to stop at stop signs. And they didn't want to tell us that that was happening because they wanted them, my mother, to take care of them because we were too busy to do that. And so they hid. Is that better? They hid. You may need to turn my mic up. People are not hearing me. So it's a typical system. Very hard to diagnose. But we finally diagnosed it. We lived in an apartment. And then not long after that, we put her in an adult care home, then a final dementia stage. So she lasted until 1991. So we were moving, and we moved at that time. And so it was a total of 12 years where we were caring for her. Now, my daughter had a career as Lynn, you'll hear that name all the time, had a career as a Microsoft recruiter. She finally became a technical consultant in human resources management. After that, she went to work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, recruiting high-level people for some of their programs. And then she decided that she wanted to be a special education teacher, so she went back, got a master's, and was a special education teacher from 2019 until she started noticing she had problems. And finally, we diagnosed that she had mild cognitive impairment, and she retired at that age, lived in a house with 3 teenage boys as a divorcee, taking care of them, and they were taking care of her, and we found out that they were covering up for her also. So it's a typical problem, and my grandsons finally were able to help us get her moved, and she's now been in assisted living since 2018.
It's important to understand the word dementia and how that's different from Alzheimer's. Dementia is an umbrella term for all kinds of memory issues, brain issues. It's used kind of sometimes interchangeably with Alzheimer's, but Alzheimer's is a specific kind of dementia. And there are a number of different kinds. Symptoms of memory are common to all of them, but let's just run down briefly all the other kinds besides Alzheimer's, and then we'll focus on Alzheimer's. Vascular dementia is caused by a block or reduced blood flow to the brain, and it becomes progressively worse as it deprives the brain cells of oxygen. Sometimes it's triggered by an aneurysm or a stroke. It only accounts for about 10% of dementia cases, so we'll skip over that pretty quickly. People over 65, of course, are at a higher risk. As we age, we're at a higher risk of everything, aren't we? The common early signs of vascular dementia include impaired planning and judgment, uncontrolled laughing or crying, a declining ability to pay attention, and impaired social functions in social situations. Lewy body dementia, I never even heard of until the last few months. Lewy body proteins are this strange kind of protein that aggregates in the brain and interferes with the transmission of information across neurons. It also is evidenced by changes in thinking and reasoning, fluctuating cognition that's sometimes delirium-like, even hallucinations. Spontaneous Parkinsonianism is also evidence with the impact on muscles and tremors and so forth. Frontotemporal dementia, this is the frontal lobe, and the temporal lobes are here. And in this kind of dementia, those are the areas of the brain that are impacted. Results in progressive degeneration of those lobes, and is usually diagnosed between 45 and 65. So that's the one I go, phew, I beat that one, right? The first signs manifest as changes in behavior and emotions, such as depression, poor judgment, lack of inhibition, compulsive behavior, executive function, that is the planning function of our brains, and difficulty with producing and comprehending language. Parkinson's we're likely to know more about than some of these other ones. Parkinson's does not always result, or it manifests as dementia, but sometimes it does, with a decline in thinking and reasoning. And it usually appears about a year after the Parkinson's diagnosis. It results in changes in memory, concentration and judgment, trouble interpreting visual information, muffled speech, hallucinations, delusions, depression, irritability, anxiety, sleep disturbances, including excessive daytime drowsiness. One that's less common is Huntington's. It's caused by a defective gene, therefore is hereditary, of course. It affects the central area of the brain, movement, mood, and thinking skills. It usually develops between ages of 30 and 50. I'm not seeing anybody here under 50, right? So maybe we beat that one. Oh, there is some, no, there's nobody. I was going to say my son is under 50, but he's not.
You made it to our group, guys.
Then there is alcohol-induced dementia. That's something that perhaps we've seen in people who drink too much for too many years.
They're meeting downstairs.
Yeah, AA is meeting downstairs. Having lived next to the Navajo reservation where alcoholism is a serious, serious crime, frequently saw alcohol-induced dementia. So finally, Alzheimer's, it's the most common. It's the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. Isn't that surprising? And it's likely to increase as the boomers hit this age range, and as medical science keeps us all alive from our other. I take medicines for blood pressure, for cholesterol, so maybe I'm not going to die of those things. I'll live long enough to get Alzheimer's, right? So it's an increasing problem in our society and our culture, and it behooves us to become more aware of it. It's an irreversible, progressive brain disorder that slowly destroys memory and thinking skills, and eventually the ability to carry out the simplest of tasks. In the end stage, one is totally dependent on caregivers. So, over 5 million Americans are living with it. Someone in the US develops it every 66 seconds. So if we got off the hook from some of those other dementias, we don't get off the hook of this one, right? Jim's going to talk about our risks for developing Alzheimer's.
We've built in spaces for Q&A, so as we get through, we'll be talking as we head in each part. So we know that Alzheimer's was first diagnosed over 110 years ago. We cannot do anything about Alzheimer's, and nobody has ever survived Alzheimer's. It is an irreversible, fatal disease. It occurs in the 3 major regions of the brain. And we don't know when it starts. As a matter of fact, we're beginning to believe it starts 5 to 10 years before we do have a diagnosis of it. So that's what's helping science, trying to find out what's going on. We don't know the cause of it. We do know what happens to the brain. Tau, T-A-U, and another one, plaques, amyloid plaques, occur in the brain. And they get on the neurons, and they slowly block the neurons from getting any blood and nutrition. So the neuron cells disappear. They shrink and then go away. So my daughter's brain, in the last scan we had already shrunk. And they all shrink about 1/3. So what are the risks for developing Alzheimer's? The first one is called age. 5% of people with dementia are 65 to 74 years old, but it isn't onset during that time period. My daughter is one of the very few who had it at the age of somewhere around 45. She was incredibly unlucky. We don't know why. Then 13% of the people between 75 and 84 will have Alzheimer's. That's 13%. And then 33% of people over 85. I'm 81. I'm hurtling towards the age of 85 when my odds are only 3 to 1. But that's what's happening. So it's age. And incidentally, Alzheimer's causes about 80% of all the dementia that we have in the world. 80%. It's by far the leading issue. There's a second cause of Alzheimer's that we're very clear about, and it's called a GPOE4 gene. There. All of us have 3 kinds of GPOE genes in us. Some of them are the E2 gene, some of them are the E3 gene, and some of them are the E4 gene. And they can spot that in your genes, in our genes. you will get one of those genes from your father, and you will get one of them from your mother. So everybody has two of them. If you have one GPOE E4, you are more likely to have Alzheimer's, significantly more likely than anyone else. If you have two GPOE, you are very, very likely to get Alzheimer's. It's not a large percentage of the Alzheimer's cases, but there are families that are working with it. We know families that have it, and everybody in the family gets it. And there is one woman in Colombia who had the GPOE 2 E4s. She had the tau in her brain. She had the amyloid plaques, but she did not get it. We don't know why, but we have her as part of a study, and that study is looking to see how did that happen for her. So that's a opportunistic way to try to solve this. But she is the only one. And she did not develop Alzheimer's, so nobody knew that she had it. She had the genes. Do we need a better place for that? Or
Need a better place for this.
Okay. So that's to tell you that a genetic issue. Of course, if one of you in the family has it, it begins to become information to send it around. My family did not have it. My mother does not. We donated her brain cells and stem to the Oregon Health Sciences University to determine whether or not there was a genetic gene that was going to be passed down to me and my brother and sister, and from us on down to our kids. And we did not see anything there. So when my daughter began to have symptoms, I told my kids, I told my wife, and we both agreed, Lynn's not going to get it. We don't have the genes. So, but what we now know is, if your family history is such that any blood relative, by that I mean direct blood relative, your parent, your brother, your sister, or either parent, you are more likely to get Alzheimer's. So I'm in a family where my mother had Alzheimer's. My brother and sister did not get it. My mother got it. I didn't get it yet. So, you know, who knows what's going to happen. But I didn't get it yet. Now that my daughter has it, her 3 grandsons are more likely to get it. Her 3 sons, my grandsons, are more likely to get it. So that's an awareness of what's happening and an awareness of why Carol and I believe that we need to really make sure any organization that's dealing with older people should be aware of it and do things about it. And we both believe that a classic, huge place that could work is faith institutions, churches. I mean, we're all dealing with these issues. So, we're ready to go to 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's, which is at 10:22.
Whoa. Good timing. I'm impressed. Now we'll see about 10 warning signs.
I must tell you, it's interesting to have a priest in a relationship, and I'm taking many kinds of orders that I've never taken before.
Well, as you can well imagine, diagnosing Alzheimer's is very difficult because of all of these symptoms that overlap with all those other kinds of dementias. But it is important to detect as early as possible, and we'll talk more about that later. You're supposed to talk.
I'm talking about them, or
No, you're talking right here.
you're...
You're talking right there.
Oh, okay. It's difficult to diagnose for the reasons we've just talked about. We're older, you know. So we have memory issues as they decline. So the point is that if these symptoms start showing up, you want to start paying attention to them because it's very difficult to diagnose. So these 10 symptoms do not come in any specific order. They do not progress in any simple order. You will not, sometimes people with dementia will have no indications of some of these symptoms that we see because the brain distribution is random. What is happening in there is cells disappear, and they disappear at different places. Think of a huge apartment building where the lights are going off one at a time in the evening, and you don't know which one's next. So this is why we think it's important to know the 10 symptoms. In fact, this is what the church group asked us to talk about. We're thrilled to do that. So.
Persons with dementia have memory loss problems that disrupt daily life. This is an important symptom and probably the most common, and the one that we most worry about in ourselves, right?
My mother lived in Peoria. My brother lived in Peoria, and his 2 sons loved her and came over to see her often. So the big treat would be to get to stay at her house overnight. So one day she took them to a movie in the afternoon and told them she would come back and pick them up 2.5 hours later. She forgot. They walked 3 miles back to her apartment at the age of 10 and 8. They knocked on the door. She opened the door and she said, "Oh, it's so nice for you to come see your Grammy unannounced." My brother and daughter and sister-in-law said, "She's not going to take care of our kids anymore." Never told us, never told me, never told anybody. That was a significant symptom.
So what's the difference between normal kind of memory loss and Alzheimer's? We all get sidetracked and forget what we were doing. You get to the kitchen and say, "What am I here for?" It's actually the hereafter. What am I here after, right? The computers become harder and harder. I swear it's the computer and technology's fault, not mine. But things with normal aging don't disrupt our life generally. Our daily life. It's no major disruptions. We find it helpful to make lists, but most of us can remember at least that we made a list. We can get to the grocery store maybe and not remember what we were going to buy, but by the time we get home, we remember. With Alzheimer's, that would not be so. The second symptom is difficulty solving problems. I'm starting to see this in my sister Judy. It worries me. Because the frontal lobe begins to become affected, it's very difficult to solve a problem, to develop a plan, to follow a plan. This is the executive function. Follow a recipe, monitor the monthly bills, difficulty concentrating, taking much longer to do things than they did before.
My daughter was suspicious that she had memory problems in 2013, 2014, because she wrote in her journal, "Dear God, please give me enough time to solve the problems I have. Give me the faith that I have the time to solve them." She had serious failures trying to use the software at the school system in 2014, 2015, 2016. Now, she did not have problems with computers because she taught every one of her grandsons everything they knew about computers because they told me that. But still, suddenly, she couldn't deal with the software and began to worry about that.
So in typical age-related change, we'll make occasional errors. I'm trying to switch my bill paying system to online, and then I don't get the bill in the mail, and so I don't get it paid on time. These kinds of things are the normal sorts of issues that we face. It's normal to forget appointments and names and telephone numbers from time to time, but people with Alzheimer's forget such things more often, and they don't remember them at all later.
And they don't know how to figure out what happened. Good.
Struggling with simple tasks. Persons with dementia find it hard to complete daily tasks, trouble driving to a familiar location, or once again, managing a budget, or remembering the rules of a favorite game. They always played that game and suddenly they can't remember the rules of the game.
My daughter loved to cook. The boys one day saw her put the pot of spaghetti on the burner. She put the water in. She put the noodles in. She put the sauce for the spaghetti in and turned on the burner. And our kids thought, I don't think that's the right way to do that, Mom.
So with normal aging, we don't even realize the steps it takes to do something. I had a friend who had a sequencing problem. It wasn't dementia, but she had to consciously think, to make a cup of tea, I have to get the cup out of the cupboard, I have to put water in it, or heat, or microwave, whatever method, and that, there's a lot of things involved in making a cup of tea, and we don't, those kinds of daily activities, we don't even stop and think that all of those steps are involved in something like that. We just do them. We may have to think about the rules of a familiar game, but soon they fall in place and we're winning. Okay, I keep forgetting that it doesn't.
Oh, I'm doing this one. No, I
I'm
did that
doing
one.
this one.
You're on 4, right?
We're on 4.
Sorry about my memory problems.
So people with dementia have a hard time tracking dates and seasons, the passage of time, or forget where and where they are, or how they got there, and how much time has passed. They may have trouble understanding something if it's not happening right away.
When my mother moved up to Lansing to help with our kids, she left my daughter, Lynn, in the snow for an hour after her activity at the school. And fortunately, she could call a friend who was able to take her home. My son walked out in a real snowstorm in his tennis shoes after his basketball practice, and he was waiting for his mom. He couldn't find anybody to talk to. He was out there for about 2 to 3 hours, and that's when we discovered what was going on and sat down with our kids and said, what is going on? That's when they confessed that we had to tell her stop signs, we had to tell her what location we had to drive to. They had to steer her where they were going, and they did it as a team. And also, my daughter Lynn had problems with medications. Some of us are taking lots of medications. And in the mornings, she was supposed to have her medications. My wife was on the phone to her every single morning saying, okay, take your medications. Mom, I'm taking my medications. And then when we would go over, we would find pill boxes, and she had not taken them daily. Even though with pill procedures and everything that we could put up, she just couldn't track it.
So with normal aging, of course, we forget dates from time to time, appointments from time to time. If you ask me what the date today is, the only reason why I know is it's been on our calendar for a month, right? I hate it when you go to the doctor and they say, do you know what the date is? And I don't know what the date is. I'm retired. What does it even matter what the date is? I might remember to tell you.
Or the day of the week, who cares?
That's right, I might say it's Wednesday.
As long as we don't have to go to church today, we're okay.
I tell people if I didn't go to church every week, I don't know how I would mark the passage of time. I lose track of Thursday, whatever. So normally, we can get through that without it disrupting our schedules or our days, and we apologize for a missed appointment, and the next time we're fine, right? That's what happens normally. So symptom number 5 is visual problems. And we see this in Lynn. He'll talk about that. A person with dementia will have difficulty reading, judging distance because of the visual focus issues, determining color and contrast, which of course these things would cause trouble with driving.
We didn't really recognize any visual problems as early symptoms in either my mother or Lynn. Just wasn't something that we spotted. But now, of course, Lynn has significant visual problems. She can't get a postcard now. She can't read a card. Give her something with a picture on it, she just drops it out of her hand. She doesn't know how to focus on that. On the other hand, when I come in to see her, she sees me. She looks at me. She's relieved to see me. And on a Thursday, I told Lynn, I said, Lynn, I have a girlfriend. And she didn't say anything. Frequently, she just looks at me. She understands me. So on Friday, I said, Lynn, I have a girlfriend. And she didn't say anything. And Saturday, Carol and I walked in to see her. Carol had wanted to see her so much. I think we were ready. And Lynn looked at me and said, she's nice. Lynn watched Carol walk around the table so she could sit next to Lynn and talk to her. And Lynn looked right at her and said, she's nice. When we go up now, when we both go up to see her, she looks up and she sees Carol and she says, oh, Mom. And then you can see the confusion on her head. She's not quite sure who this woman is, but she's kind of like a mother. And so they talk to each other now. The women talk to each other than they do the men. So Dad kind of takes a second role at times. Because, matter of fact, I'm going to tell the story. We didn't have it in here. She sat on the bed with Lynn. We were talking. Lynn said, I like your dad. No, Carol said, I like your dad. Lynn said, I love my dad. Carol said, I love your dad. And Lynn said, that's good. So
she can put 2, 3, 4 words together. Any more than that, and it's just, and she makes a point. And then once in a while she'll say one word, and we'll kind of get a clue about maybe what she's thinking. Visual problems for people without dementia, it's our cataracts or, all those other kinds of eye issues, color blindness in men, those sorts of things. But those are normal kind of visual problems. So the 6th one is difficulty with words. That's just what I said with her. People with dementia might have trouble following or joining a conversation. The conversation goes too quickly and they can't track what it's about or where it's going, or get a word in edgewise because their processing speed is slowed down so much. They may stop in the middle of a conversation and I have no idea how to continue. I do that. Do you do that? I do that a lot. Do y'all do that? In the middle of talking, you go, someone interrupts me and it's all over. I don't know what I was talking about. Makes me nervous. They may forget simple words, and so they substitute unusual words, like, for example, to describe a toothbrush, they may say, that thing for my mouth. Now, my oldest sister had a stroke, and she'll do this when she can't come up with a word. That's not dementia, but
Was that Alzheimer's? Maybe dementia?
yeah, right.
My wife was at a table with our whole family having a meal, and she noticed Lynn trying to come up with words and trying to communicate at that dinner table. And as she got unable to say them, Lynn had a face that my wife said was the most miserable and sorrowful that she remembered. She couldn't say it, and so she withdrew from the dinner conversation. Just kind of disappeared into herself.
And ironically, the more they withdraw, the worse the condition becomes. It's been shown that the more active we can keep our brains, even us people that have not been diagnosed, the more active, that's why you keep hearing older people should be playing word games and should be engaged socially to keep those neurons firing. So then the next one is misplacing objects.
Did you misplace your sheet?
I misplaced my sheet, right? I'm worried. We saw a movie recently, it was made some time ago, called Away From Her. Mm-hmm. A movie called Away From Her, and it was from the point of view of the husband. And away from me, whatever.
Away from her.
Away from her, yeah. And in the opening scenes, we kind of laughed about it because it was sort of like check mark. In the opening scenes, she demonstrated every one of these symptoms. She took a pan off of the stove. Ordinarily, you'd put it in the sink, wash it. She put it in the refrigerator. And the next one, she was wandering through the snow skiing by herself, and I said to Jim, she's going to get lost. He was like, check. But that I remember that so vividly, that she put the pan in the refrigerator. They may accuse people of stealing. I had a parishioner once who had a housekeeper come in periodically. This was a woman that was very isolated, and she would complain to me about the housekeeper stealing things. And at the time, I didn't know enough to recognize that as a possible symptom.
My daughter couldn't find her keys or purse. Every time we had a trip over there, we had to spend an extra 5-10 minutes when we picked her up because she couldn't find those things. And it got worse and worse and worse. My mother had a place where she liked to go shopping right across from her apartment when we were in Eugene. And we got a call from the grocery owner regularly who said, I've got your mom's purse.
We all misplace things from time to time. With Josh's dad, it was sort of like every day I was helping him find where his keys were, those the normal kinds of things. But what's interesting is when people without Alzheimer's lose things, we usually go, okay, when did I last use that? Oh yeah, I remember, I was in the bedroom and I put them down. We have that kind of way of recalling and coming up with an idea about where that object might be. A person with Alzheimer's isn't going to be able to take those steps back to retrace, and therefore the things are really irretrievably lost, if you will. The eighth symptom is reduced judgment. I might say, and I don't know if I told you this story, a woman at Wesley, a good friend, I was told by another one of her friends that she appeared for a luncheon in very inappropriate clothes. She put on a see-through blouse, with a bra, I'm sure, to go to a luncheon. Didn't have any idea how inappropriate the reduced judgment about what to wear was going on with her. People may misuse the way that they handle their money, may neglect grooming, cleanliness, that sort of thing, because the judgment's going.
My mother had an accident when she was living in Peoria by herself, and people have accidents. We didn't think anything about it. But when we began to really look into it, my brother said he had checked into it, and she was trying to turn left from the far right lane in a 4-lane highway. She just started turning left. Lynn drove to meet her younger sister in a campground just south of Mount Rainier in a forest park. I don't know if you've ever tried to find a campground in the forest roads. It's pretty tricky. But Pam gave her very specific instructions. And Lynn got down there late at night and could not find it and went back on the roads 2 or 3 times to try to find it in unmarked roads. And finally, she happened on a ranger. Ranger couldn't figure out what to do, took her over someplace where she could have dinner and stayed all night in a hotel. And of course, there's no cell phone in the wilderness, right? So even though she had a cell phone, she couldn't call anybody.
For normal behaviors, when it comes to driving, for example, I've decided I really shouldn't be driving at night. That's good judgment. Normal aging is being able to discern those kinds of things and to make appropriate judgments. The 9th symptom is social withdrawal. Oh, we did talk about that, didn't we?
A little bit.
I think I crossed
we
over.
We put that into the words. And the lack of ability to talk with words causes people to social withdrawal.
Good. So at any rate, people may withdraw from their hobbies, from their friends, and so forth. We've talked about that. Go ahead.
When my daughter was diagnosed with mild cognitive dementia, both of my grandsons who were in college dropped out of school to take care of her and live with her at home. Worked part-time at Dick's Burgers and went to the community college instead. They set up social arrangement for her. They called her friends, said she needs to talk. They set an appointment. Lynn said, yeah, that's great, I'll go, won't be a problem. But then when the friend would call and say, I'll come pick you up, Lynn wouldn't answer the phone. She wouldn't go to the door. She's just too embarrassed to talk about it. Well, help! I'm glad.
So in normal circumstances, we may choose not to keep an appointment because we're just not in the mood. That happens from time to time. Or we may lose initiative to do stuff, sit around for a few days. The inertia sets in, but we finally get it together and get back out there and participate. Did anybody watch this series, Virgin River? There's a woman on there, and she demonstrated a lot of these symptoms, including social withdrawal. Next one. Changes in mood and personality. People with dementia can get confused, suspicious, frustrated, depressed, fearful, anxious, and therefore easily upset. Those are occasions when all of us are going to be upset. But these might happen suddenly and without explanation, just an outburst of some kind. We've seen Lynn do that. And the moods may swing rather suddenly back and forth.
When Lynn was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment and then later with Alzheimer's just 6 months later, she said, Dad, I'm not going to be sad. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be happy. Grandma was happy. My mother was happy. She was just kind of blithe about it and lived for quite a while. Didn't see moods, but Lynn announced that was going to happen. 4 months later, we got on a cruise to celebrate the fact that we'd gotten her financials in order and that pressure was off, and we got a lot done. So my wife and I and Lynn and my youngest daughter, and Lynn's grandson.
Lynn's son.
Lynn's son. Lynn doesn't have a grandson.
Yeah, your grandson.
My son. Maybe I was supposed to be able to cover all that up, but obviously I can't. The first night, she was in a room with her younger sister and my wife, and she exploded with profanity and fury and said, "I'm not going to die. I'm going to beat this. I'm going to be the first one to live." And she just went on and on. My wife was devastated. And then her son walked in on things and how we're going. She was still ranting and raving. And when my younger sister got her into the bathroom to just kind of settle down, and my wife hugged my grandson and said, "I'm sorry you had to hear this." He said, "I've heard it before." The first thing we should have done when we got a diagnosis was give her counseling help. She'd been worrying about it for 5 years and then tried to be brave and make me feel she's going to be happy. She needed the counseling as much and more than we did.
And with all of that, and I'm thinking about having read about the loss of inhibition. You hear about people suddenly swearing, using foul words they never ever would have used before. It's the part of the brain where inhibitions have been destroyed and behaviors come out that appear more like a personality change.
So I think at this stage, we figured it would be good to take some time and just see what kind of questions you have or anything you'd like us to talk about. I know there's some of you in the room that know a lot more about us than we do, or in some way are experienced with it. So we'd love to have any comments or questions that you have, because we had planned to take an...
Oh, I lost my ambo mic.
No,
Can I
it's
have the
there.
mic back, please?
It's on.
No, it's not. Now? Okay. No, it's still not on. Hello? Okay, there we go. Thank you. As we do shift into this, I just want to ask our presenters to repeat the question for the sake of those online who will not be able to hear it otherwise. And also, Jim, you're wonderfully soft-spoken. I wonder if anyone else is having trouble hearing Jim sometimes? Sometimes. So yeah,
Just
Jim, if
about
you could
half of you.
speak up a little more, that would be great. Thank you.
Crank it up, Bob, crank it up.
Your voice seems to drop at the end of the sentence. Right. So I'm trying to pick up.
Now, we
I've
will be
heard that
talking.
said to me about 126 times. I have never been able to solve the problem, but thank you for reminding me. So I'll keep going on it, because
So after your questions at this point, we will be talking about the stages of the disease. So just to let you know, that's where we're going. Go ahead.
Yes, I have a question about the environment that a person with dementia, does that environment that they're living in have an impact on the progression of their disease?
Are you talking about environmental factors like poor air quality or water quality? Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? Yeah. I think that is in one of those categories of it could be, not sure, don't know. Yeah.
when we got the diagnosis for Lynn, we had a lot of time trying to adjust the environment she was living in. She was the parent of 3 teenage boys. And so we said, we think we ought to give you help with a daycare person. Come in to clean your house, whatever. Just didn't need. But her house was a mess. The kids were, stumbling over the clothes were piled in the bottom of their... So that whole environment was a very serious problem in accelerating her decline. And we see that in terms of the kinds of designs that people put in retirement homes. They're working to correct that because there are absolutely ways to postpone the symptoms of dementia, to face them, and to create an environment that they're comfortable with. So yeah, the environment of the home, for example, is a very important factor. The more active you can be, the more games you can play, the more exercise you get, will be very effective at delaying some of the symptoms that will come on.
Good diet.
Good question.
Yeah, and
How
good,
they do they stay up?
and good diet.
Yes, good diet,
Yeah.
absolutely. Sleep, exercise. The more social you are, you know, one of the most effective things is play bridge because you're always problem solving. You're talking to people who have a lot of friends. You're relaxed, you're having a good time. That social environment has a tendency to postpone Alzheimer's.
And conversations.
Did I give the right answer?
Is that helpful? There are so many conversations about where research might be leading to help with these issues. And certainly a cure is far, far away, but there seems to be some progress on medications that would delay symptoms. So that's something we can hope for. More questions? Yes.
Does it postpone the disease or simply postpone the symptoms? And part of the question is, have you heard about music as a countering to loss of memory? And are you aware of Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett as an example? Repeat the question.
Okay.
Geez, we haven't even done that. Yeah. Have we talked about some of the others? He's asking if we've talked about some of the other inventions in the environment that can have an effect on delaying dementia or producing some very positive effects. Music is definitely one of the ones that do that. Tony Bennett put on a performance with Lady Gaga and was able to do his entire routine. All right? Other people have had presentations, sermons that they give. They can repeat them verbatim. When people go in to visit, if they take a hymn book and they take music, they can sit there and play hymns, and those words will come back to them. Music is a powerful thing. All 5 senses are powerful things. Aromas are very important, particularly for women who do a lot of cooking. You know, touch, tactile things. They went in to see a veteran, and they brought in his patch, and they gave it to him. It just exploded with memories about what that patch meant to him. So, and then the same thing is with hearing. The more you can hear and talk to people slowly. I have talked to Lynn in a way that's slower and repeat it over 3 times. And she gets it the 3rd time. So the way we communicate with people is also very important.
Did that answer your question?
Yes,
Yeah.
It was actually declaring us to say more about it.
Yeah, right. There goes the word.
We're glad you did that. Pardon?
I was to say, Chris, I know music's a big thing for you. I just started following a TikTok page called the Dementia Project, and they're using headphones where they broadcast it through all the headphones to the people in the room, and it helps them relive memories and so on, that music. So they're hearing it, they can't lose the concentration so much because it's right on their ears.
Interesting.
And they're having really some really positive outcomes from doing that.
Excellent.
I did that with my daughter because when I found out how much she liked music and it was lifting up, I got a backpack for her and I put her cell phone in it, connected it to Pandora and other music programs, and then gave her headphones and put those on. Because not only did it help her hear them more clearly, it also helped them be not distracted by all the other things that were going on around her. However, headphones were she had to get those things off her head. Different problems to work with. Time for a break?
I think so. Are we cutting off any questions right on the tip of your tongue?
Are you going to go into the whole issue of people that definitional signs of Alzheimer's and dementia Now we use it in institution, it could be good care and so on,
Right.
but that could obviously be a very difficult issue or matter to try to deal with, I suppose.
Yeah,
Yeah, so the question he's at, you gonna repeat it?
the question is about how to help people who are in denial and not wanting to deal with it. We're going to talk about the stages later, and so make sure we cover that when we talk about when we talk about those stages.
Not only the stages, but what Carol and I have proposed to Federal Ways, Good Shepherd, is that we have a second session which talks much more about what the church can do to help people with that. And sometimes your people in the congregation or somebody who knows you well enough can take you aside and say, you're putting a lot of pressure on the family or whatever, or meet other people. And we think the church could be really helpful in bringing that kind of care in. So that's part. That we'll spend more time doing that things, how to deal with people who have these signs of dementia, and what do you say to help them with that?
So let's take, let me just say this. If you recognize any warning signs in yourself or a loved one, consult a physician early. That's extremely important. But don't get too depressed about losing your keys or forgetting the rules of a game. It's the pattern. It's the pattern. So just be aware. An early diagnosis can make a huge amount of difference. Not one possibility is to then be in a study that will help Alzheimer's researchers, and another is to have people have time to take care of their affairs and so forth. So,
Do we need a break? Shall we just keep going?
I need a break.
Okay.
5 minutes.
Carol asked for a break.
We'll come back in just a few minutes, and if you're watching the recording later, you can always just fast forward to where the action is.
This voice of God seems Okay, there are a couple of people who haven't made it back yet, or maybe have decided not to come back. So, but let's start into the Alzheimer's disease stages. It's difficult to know exactly what a stage is. So the reason is, as I told you before, the neurons die on a random basis. So there are a number of ways. What happens is you lose the ability to do your mental capacity, but your body also does not know how to get the bodily functions done it needs to do. So my daughter ended up in the final stage when she was improperly putting clothes on without assistance. They had to dress her completely. She's unable to bathe properly. My daughter-in-law gave her some shaving cream to shave her legs. And when she went back to the shower to look at her, Lynn had put it all over herself thinking it was a shampoo. Inability to handle mechanics of toileting, just can't deal with the toilet. I've seen that. And it's a hygienic problem, et cetera. And the other thing is the losing the ability to smile. No, that's not listed. The urinary incontinence and fecal incontinence are the stages that people consider as the 6th, where you're going to have to get a lot of care in the 7th stage. And that's where my daughter is now. But she still walks. I told you stories. She can still talk. Ambulatory is not gone. She can sit up without assistance. But over time, she loses all of that. I've been up in a lot of, and I've seen all of the people going through all of the different stages of that as they are unable to sit. So I'm going to go through these just kind of as a sense of getting awareness and just pop through them as fast without understanding. We already talked about the first one, which is the preclinical Alzheimer's dementia. And it is the diagnosis that there are some things going on, but we don't know what it is. There's TIA, brain damage, other physical problems that can go on. The second one is called mild cognitive impairment. That is the first diagnosis that my daughter had. It's not actually declared Alzheimer's at that stage, but there is a medical problem coming on, most likely. And my daughter realized for the first time when she had Alzheimer's that she had a medical disease when she was teaching her class, and all the children were there lying around in her special education classroom, excited for her to start the day again. And she was up on the blackboard telling them exactly what would happen that day. She turned around with her magic marker in and tried to write the date. She knew exactly what date it was, but she could not tell her fingers to move and put the numbers down. And that's when she knew she had to quit denying that she didn't have Alzheimer's. So those things come to people and in the mild cognitive impairment. The next one is the moderate dementia. That's when my daughter had dementia. She had been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. We spent 6 months trying to see if we could help her. Then she had a follow-up diagnosis, and when she had the follow-up diagnosis, her diagnosis was advanced, younger onset Alzheimer's. So she had been covering it up pretty well for quite a while. And we were scared of her living in the house. The burners were left on. You can imagine the kinds of things that when you have grandsons, you worry about them being in that house. At the same time, you're worrying about your daughter caring. We took her car away, all those things. So that's the moderate stage of dementia. She stayed in her home. We got somebody to come in as a home companion 2 days a week. That worked. Then we wanted 3 days a week because we were getting reports, but we were afraid. Lynn didn't want another intruder in her house. She had enough of that. But we finally got her to agree to that, and shortly after that, her ex-husband, who I must say just has been a fantastic guy in this whole process. Alimony started way back in 2009. He has fulfilled every single iota of the promises that he made. loves the boys and took them, and he just said to Lynn, I'll take the boys, I'll put them on my medical program. They don't have to live at home. And the minute Lynn knew that her boys were going to be safe and that she could be in a home that was close to where she would go, she said, I'll go. And that's when we took her. We were talking a question about somebody with difficulty resisting. She fought us for 5 years, just fought with everything. But when that happened, she went right in. That was moderate dementia. Then in severe dementia, which is where she is now, her medications are administered to her, obviously. She's dressed. She puts on casual clothes. She still wants to see visitors, but she doesn't know who most of the people are that come to see her. She knows the caregivers. In the number of times, as long as Carol's with me, she knows Carol. She knows me as her dad. She knows her sons. But she's losing a lot of that. And I just want to say to you that one of the things she can't do is read a card, a postcard. You know, and we have many programs in churches where we send cards to people who are ill. Well, she's getting those cards. They don't do any good for her. We figured out a way to solve that problem by saying, tell us stories. So some people wrote stories. I got the sheet. I sat down with her sons, and I read those stories of her friend. Their boys had never heard those stories before. So it's a wonderful way to kind of stay in touch in the areas of symptoms of everyday practices. And there's no defined time frame for how long she's going to be in this, because the way Alzheimer's causes death is will not tell the body what it needs to do. She does not know how to swallow, or she becomes aspirated. She gets food and everything in her lungs. If that goes on, she'll get an injury in her foot. She's had one, and it got infected. We don't pay attention to that. It moves into sepsis, all right? So all sorts of ways that my mother finally died of that. Her definition of death was pneumonia, all right? It wasn't pneumonia. It was the fact that her lungs had filled with water. She wasn't taking care of it in a way that she could. She just was unable to do that. She was almost comatose. I kissed her on the forehead when I said goodbye to her, because I had to go on a trip, and I felt like I was kissing a skeleton. But I still believe that she heard that and felt that kiss. But 2 days later, she died. So I just wanted to tell you, those are the stages. Those are why people die of Alzheimer's. And you can care for them for quite a while and not know when that's going to happen. So the next section we're going to talk about is, do people with Alzheimer's disappear?
You've probably heard people say, is my mic on? Yeah. You've probably heard people say, well, she's disappeared. Or, I'm not going to visit anymore because she doesn't know me. I've heard priests say, I don't go there anymore because she doesn't even know who I am. Culturally, we need to make a major shift. Our culture has placed so much importance on cognition to the neglect of the rest of who we are that we end up dismissing people whose cognition is no longer good. The whole culture needs to change in this way. There is a stigma against dementia because we refuse to recognize the person does not disappear. The person's still in there. I said to Lynn one day, we were watching TV together, and a person came on who said that he was born with spinal bifida. Remember, Lynn was a special ed teacher. I turned to Lynn and I said, Lynn, he has spinal bifida. And she looked at me, eye contact, and said, that's bad. She might not be able to carry on a conversation, but she is there. I'm sure she had a student with spinal bifida.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Right. So we need to reframe our understanding of what happens as the brain slowly dies. We as God's conveyors of love are in a unique position to actually help a person with dementia not disappear. And church congregations are especially situated to wrap collective arms of love around persons with dementia. So let's talk about what we can do, coming back to your question. In the preclinical phase of Alzheimer's, the best thing that we can do is to treat people with respect. Baptismal vow, honor the dignity of every human being. I had a friend whose husband was, in Kearney, whose husband was becoming increasingly worse. And she would say in front of him to us, "Oh, that's not true." I was so uncomfortable. She was not treating her own husband with the respect that he was due. In this pre-diagnosis phase, it might be just a few attenders of the church who start wondering about a parishioner, start suspecting, start being concerned, or the spouse or other caregiver begins to hint at concerns. Listen, don't dismiss. There's a cry for help in there. Anya has been very open with us and very open about permission for us to cite Anya and David as a case here in this congregation where I have seen many in the congregation be really, really good at honoring David. Depending on our relationship with the person with dementia and the family, we may be the best situated to encourage the family to see a doctor. And when there's denial, to stay on it,
Let me just give you an observation. Because of a conversation about somebody possibly having Alzheimer's or dementia problems at Wesley Homes, where she is, they talked about it a little bit. And since then, people who knew that she was working with Alzheimer's are coming out of the woodwork and talking to her, saying, "I'm worried about my brother, I'm worried about my husband, I'm worried about my wife." They're just coming to her now. We in our faith institutions can do that because early analysis is so important. Going directly to your point of, I don't want to hear that, but if they knew there was a more receptive community to listen to that care, they might go.
So caregiving in the mild cognitive impairment stage. As cognitive impairment increases, it's up to us to put in the extra effort to understand the symptoms and to learn how to respond. The most important thing, and I learned this just by watching Jim from the first time I went with him to meet Karen, is to develop a habit of active listening. You know, active listening is exhausting. Ordinarily, from day to day, we listen. Yeah, I know what you said. No. Active listening is just being there totally for the person, being attentive, noticing. We took Lynn to the doctor once with this foot problem, and the doctor came in and looked at Lynn, and Lynn had fallen a couple of weeks before and bruised her face, and so there were still bruises that were not gone. This doctor came into the room, focused on her face, and wanted to talk about the face. And we talked about, oh, she fell a couple of weeks ago. This is not about that. This is about the swollen foot. Then she proceeded to hit Lynn. Here, does this hurt? Does this hurt? Does this hurt? And I said, it's the foot. Oh, we have to make sure she didn't break her hip when she fell. Does this hurt? Does this hurt? And she's like this, looking down. And when she hit Lynn's foot, Lynn winced. She didn't say anything, she winced. The doctor said, she doesn't communicate, I don't know where she hurts. We just about died.
Carol picked that up, I missed it.
The communication is there, but we have to put in the extra effort. That's what we can offer. Remember, the ability to think is deteriorating. And so we need to respond to the emotional state. If we can't understand what they're thinking because they're not communicating, we can respond to the emotional state. So many times Lynn will say something, I have no idea what she's saying. But I'll notice that she's disturbed, or I'll notice frustrated, whatever. You respond to the emotion, not to the lack of words.
Let me throw in the story I just told you about yesterday.
Go ahead.
When I was with Lynn, we were just walking around and we came into the dining room, and there was a chair in the dining room that was tucked away in a corner, and the seat was facing the wall so that none of the other residents would come in there and sit there inappropriately. And Lynn saw that, and she started, and I couldn't understand what she was saying, but I said, do you think the chair is in the wrong place? So I took the chair, I turned it around, and I put it at the table, and she said, okay. She walked on. Just that sense of order was still there. And she was trying to communicate exactly what it was, but she was communicating it simply because she kept focusing and pointing at it all the time. Sorry to interrupt. Did you ever try to interrupt a priest? I get scared doing that.
It's up to us to put in the extra effort, the extra attention, the extra focus. And in this stage, mild cognitive impairment, now is the time to encourage family to take care of affairs. To fill out that 5 wishes thing, have you seen? And the post, you know what a post is?
How many of you have a post?
A post, P-O-L-S-T, stands for what? Anyway, it's that form that you have to take to your doctor that expresses your wishes about dying. Do you want to be resuscitated? Do you want all those sorts of things? And the doctor has to sign it, and it should be bright green, and it should be on your refrigerator or in your cupboard.
My kids got on me about it. She said, Dad, where is your post?
He had done all this for Lynn and still hadn't done it for himself at 81 years old.
Okay, I get it.
And did you know, this might be off topic, but I just remembered it. You're on Medicare, right? Everybody, except him, right? Not yet, no. There is an annual Medicare checkup that Social Security pays for, and it includes a memory checkup. Have you heard that? You have to remember the 3 words and blah, blah, blah. Draw the face of a clock and all that. I have to go in a few weeks, and I'm trying to start exercising my brain on the 3 words thing. Jim says, when he gives you the 3 words, think of a sentence. Make up a sentence with those 3 words. So I never can remember the 3 words, but I can draw the face of the clock, okay? I don't know. Anyway, so it's a temptation in a congregation to keep hush-hush about dementia. I don't know for a while if you were hush-hush about David and Anya's situation. I have no idea since I'm so new. It's a temptation to be hush-hush. But with the permission of the family, and certainly Anya's a good example of this, it's an opportunity in this mild cognitive impairment phase to create relationships while a person is still communicative. I sat down with David once at coffee hour and said, "Hi, how are you?" He said, "It's a good day." And I said, "It is a good day." We connected, to establish, if every person in the congregation knew that this person is starting to lose abilities, and focus on developing a relationship now so that you can read between the lines on what's going on and so forth. So the more the merrier. Get everyone in the church involved in connecting with a family with dementia. Caregiving in mild dementia. This is when visiting a person may become more difficult.
I thought we just did that one.
Did I just do that? Well, anyway, I haven't said this stuff here.
Oh.
Do I have time to say this
Yeah,
stuff?
permissions.
it becomes more difficult to converse with a person as language diminishes, as the sense of the person making sense is diminished. It becomes more difficult, but we can learn those. Those are skills that we can learn in how to relate and how to get through our own discomfort about those moments. And as a community, we can learn how to welcome a person with dementia. If we understand the stages, maybe somebody's sitting over here and cries out foul language. What would you do? Oh, God, I'm not preaching, you know, because the inhibition is gone. And the outburst, how would you handle it I don't know how to handle it from the pulpit. How would you handle it as a congregation? I saw one person come and join Anya once when she was distressed. It was a beautiful thing to watch. But these are things that can be learned. We can learn how to be open and accepting of people whose mental abilities are disintegrating. So caregiving in severe dementia, that's when we're likely to be visiting in a facility. And taking communion, the priest or the lay Eucharistic visitor taking communion to a person, it's teachable. We can learn how to do that. And they've shown how familiar rituals for a person, as their memory declines, those familiar rituals like singing hymns are really, really important, and they trigger something. So consult a teenager about getting Spotify on a phone, whatever.
I have to tell you this story. She's not telling it. It's down in our notes. One time I came home kind of depressed, or came back to the apartment, or after a visit, I said to Carol, I said, I think that was a failed visit. And she said, Jim, a failed visit is one that never happens. I said, okay.
I am convinced that the person is still in there. Still in there. And does a person ever disappear from God? As Christians, it is a fundamentally alien idea that a person would ever disappear from God. Neither life, nor death, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Quote from Romans. Our relationship with the divine starts before we have any memories and continues when memories disappear. We believe that our relationship with look into the eyes of a baby. That baby doesn't have any memories yet. The baby has no words yet. We don't understand cognition in pre-verbal babies. But that baby's in there. You look that baby in the eye, and that baby's in there, and you know it. I hope this isn't too personal. I decided I was going to fall in love with him even before we met in person, because we were Zooming, and he was telling me about Lynn, and he said, do you remember when you held your baby? When you held your baby and looked with wonder and amazement, just staring in the eyes of the baby. He said, that's what it's like when I visit Lynn. Just because memories are not there, just because rational thinking is not there, that's not where the soul is. The soul doesn't live here. The soul lives where Jesus lives in each of us. God does not forget. People do not disappear. Where are we?
I think we're at the, this is,
I think I did that. Let me do this. This is really a summary. There are critical spiritual needs among all those dealing with dementia that the church is best situated to respond to. Best. Especially as the church ages Maybe we despair at the lack of younger people. Maybe we've got no clue what the future of the church is. But I know what the ministry of the church is right now as we look into the eyes of each other in our own fear, in our own concerns, in our own relationship with relatives who are still in denial, might require an intervention of some kind, right? When a family becomes reconciled, the shock of a dementia diagnosis, the despair, the depression, the fear, the feelings of being overwhelmed, the unknown future, these are spiritual issues. And when a family becomes reconciled to its uncertain future, that's a spiritual blessing. In the roller coaster ride that is dementia, a church community can make all the difference in the world. Is that a conclusion?
No, there is nothing easy. There is nothing easy about dementia. There is nothing easy about Alzheimer's. But the point of the Alzheimer's Association, where we're getting involved, is to educate, raise money, to solve this disease and do what we can. And we called and talked to the people who do the education and said we'd like to educate and volunteer, but we think there's an important role for churches, faith organizations, to be involved with this. And she said, we have been trying to get them involved. We would love to have somebody start doing that. To me, it's so natural. We're dealing with an aged population, you know? So, and I just want to tell you this story. We've read in a book, and a minister was calling on people, and with dementia and things like that, and then they said to him that there was a woman who is probably a few days away from death, and she would like some last rites. And so he agreed to do that and brought in. Now, he had had quite a bit of experience with folks in this situation, so he brought in the 5 senses that we talked about, you know, senses and stuff like that. And the thing that he brought in that was a tangible, visible thing was a cross. And I don't know if I can get through this. He showed it to her. And for the first time in nobody knows how long, she said, "A cross." And she started crying and crying and crying. She said, "A cross is so important to me. We always had it above our bed." And the minister was a little bit surprised and said, "Why? Why'd you have it above your bed?" Just the conversation he's having to her. She says, "Because we had a love that was so deeply spiritual with each other, and it was in that bed where our sex was realized in displaying that love with each other. So when I see that cross, I see the love of God, the love of my mate, my husband." We need to be there. So we're done. So if you have any other questions, yes?
We have a son, early onset dementia.
Excellent.
He was in the hospital for over a month, trying to
Welcome.
find placement for him. My question is, how do you explain to your son that he's not going home? And why is he not going home?
Is he in the, everybody heard the question? Okay, the question is, she has a son with early onset Alzheimer's.
No, dementia,
Has,
frontal lobe.
oh, frontal lobe dementia, okay, early onset frontal lobe dementia. And they have moved him into a assisted living home, and he wants to know why he can't go home.
Yes.
Right? And you might get that question over and over and over again. And there is no easy answer to that. You simply can stress it's safer for him here. When I hug Lynn tightly and she's having a bad time, I said, you're safer here, hon. They love you here. They love caring for you. I love the way they're taking care of you. And this is where it's your best place to be.
Do you give them a diagnosis? Why?
Yes. And you,
That he has an illness?
well, it was an interesting thing about Lynn. Let me just tell you this story. I said one day, Lynn, well, the reason you can't do that is you have Alzheimer's. And she said, maybe that's what it is. I don't know what her cognitive level is about that, but I would make sure that he does know that there is a physical reason for him to be here. It's not something you're imposing on him. He's got a disease, and he's going to be safer, more secure, cared better, loved with people, and it is so important not only for you, but it's important for me and us to know that you're there. And you may have to say it over and over again, but in all points, make the point. He's safer. We love you. You can't go home. I don't say that. I just said, hon, you're loved here. You're cared for here. You're safer. She still tells me she wants to go home. I want to hear.
Wow.
Yeah. Sorry you're in this group. To be honest with you, you're the first person I know who is dealing with a younger onset Alzheimer child. You're the first person I have had a chance to meet who is dealing with a younger onset Alzheimer's that is a child.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have Alzheimer's,
Right.
but you have prefrontal lobe dementia. And so there are not many of us. I've actually been in talk with people who have done a national search to see if they could find how many of us there are. They can't find very many of us. And so, and my daughter was willing to go to that facility because she was still in the moderate dementia stage. And she actually, because she was a teacher, she got on that elevator and walked up, and they promised her, as staff, you're our age. The staff were really stunned to meet her. You're our age. We want you to help us. They took her on marketing programs so she could talk about how she liked where she was. She was in a facility where she could move around. There were a lot of activities. So she had a lot of those things that she could do in this facility. And she said, I'm going to go in and help these residents live, because every one of them was 15 to 20 years older. And her reaction was, I'm not going someplace where the only people I meet are older people. And she would go to a support group. She would try one support group, and all of them were the same age, 20 years younger. They were talking about different problems than she was with 3 teenage boys. So she took it on as her mission to help some of those other people, and the staff treated her as an equal. It was hugely important in getting her to come in. So maybe you can work with the staff there and those ideas.
It's very difficult to find proper housing.
Oh, yes.
We've been through that with him, and some of the nice places, they said, oh, we can't accept him because he's a flight risk.
Oh.
They were afraid he was going to leave, so they wouldn't accept him.
Well, some of the other places will not accept him if he's under 55.
Well, our son is in his mid-60s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you've got that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we took Lynn to 2 adult homes to move her from where she was now. She needed to be in better memory care. They would not take her for those very same reasons. There was a flight risk. And we finally found a place called Quail Park. They deal only with memory issues. Your son's diagnosis, I believe, is one of the ones that they deal with. My daughter is in a much better place now because she is in a place that only deals with dementia. That's what they're focusing on. Where she was before, they had all kinds of people who needed help, but they were emotional. They were outbursts. They were angry. They were, threatening. She got into fights with people. Those kinds of things are pushed, and she pushed back. So then your daughter is, but now she's loving where she is, and we love where she is because it's much more stable. You might look at something like Quail Park.
What happened, because we could not find, the whole family was working on this, we could not find somebody that would accept him. So guess what? He went home. He went home to a wife who also is showing signs of dementia. She has not been diagnosed, so we're just keeping our fingers crossed.
I would recommend that you contact the Alzheimer's Association. There is a 24-hour hotline.
Even if it's not Alzheimer's?
Because they will also include the kinds of dementias we talked about. So they'll be very willing to talk to you about that. And they then have resources in the community that can help with that and give you ideas. If you go online and say alzheimers.org, just alts.org, that 24-hour hotline will pop up. I'm supposed to have that here where you could see it, and I forgot.
That's okay. I want to encourage you guys to talk, to continue to talk after this while we take a couple other questions. Yeah.
I'm glad he's got control.
Is this mic for the purpose of in the room or only on? Okay. I'm only concerned about it for the folks online. Okay.
He doesn't care about y'all. He just wants, yeah.
I think we can all hear okay. Okay, Mary had a question, I think.
I do. Looking at this and having talked with my brother, I'm relatively sure that he certainly has a number of these signs and symptoms. So I have kind of two questions now. One is, I have two questions now. One of which, I do have a teacher voice, so I can make this happen. One of them is, what is my next step? I'm going to take this worksheet and talk to my brother today, because we decided I was going to come here, and that's what we were going to do. And then, what do I do after that? And now I have some concern, is if he is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, then what are the ramifications of that for his care and where he is and that kind of thing?
Bob, I have to repeat that for the folks online?
This mic is now helping for the folks online.
Okay. Again, I want to make sure that you understand you could go to the alzheimers.org and get the phone number to call for help 24 hours a day. And it's a 1-800 number. And if you can't find it, call Josh and I'll give it to him. We got it on the bottom?
Well, it's kind of cut off, but yes. Oh, here on this side, I can see it.
Okay, on your sheet, 1-800-272-3900. Would you like to be my assistant? So that's one thing I would say to you. The other thing is to say that the diagnosis will be of big value to him. Now, I say that because then all sorts of care can be given to him in terms of Medicare. The doctor will diagnose it for him and then send him to a neurologist. And it was much better for Lynn to get the diagnosis than it was for her to worry about the diagnosis and fight it all the time. So one of the things you can talk to him about, maybe, I'm just talking, is, are you worried about it? Because if you are, we can't deal with it effectively until we get a good diagnosis, and that takes some time. Because as you know, dementia can show up in Lewy body or something else, and so that's what he needs. Doctors now have the ability to write a discussion about that off as an expense on their diagnosis. We had to pass a federal law in this country because doctors were reluctant to talk about that. Patients were reluctant to come. Doctors were afraid to bring it up. But now it's a part of a regular process for people that are older. So there's all sorts of help they can get there. There's care groups that he can be in. Again, that 800 number will give you, I think the most important thing is for him to recognize he's going to be with a lot more people who have the same situation that he does, and he can get a lot better care for what's going on. And I wish you well. I wish you well.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, yes, go ahead, Ellen. Here's the microphone so the people online can hear. Thanks.
How do you differentiate? How do you differentiate between just absent-mindedness and oncoming dementia?
How do you differentiate between simple absent-mindedness and oncoming dementia? First of all, since we're aging, we've got oncoming dementia, all right, for a significant number of us. There are tests to determine. There is a very simple two-step test to determine that, to see whether or not you should get. My daughter was given a sheet of paper. She had to do some very simple exercises, took less than 20 minutes, by her primary care physician. And he said, I am concerned, I will give you an appointment with a neurologist. But those things can also be found online. You could take some of them yourselves. I do it, you know. Carol has just talked about it. Draw pictures, see if you can put all of
I did that. I mean, I had a doctor come to my home and
Oh, you did?
through your whole series, my insurance covered it. And he said, draw a clock. It was like 18 minutes after 10 when I did it. And he said that was fine.
See,
That was just, I can't remember the other test, but that one.
but obviously you passed it.
Yeah.
But what's that saying? What that's saying is you don't have a medical link in your head that keeps you from doing what you need to do, like my daughter had. She could not write. She could not put a clock and put the numbers on that thing because her mind could not structure it correctly. What I did not understand is she really didn't understand numbers very well, had lost capacity there way more than I realized. And I found out because we were talking to Social Security. And I said, I want to talk to my daughter because she's got a diagnosis and we want to put her on Social Security disability, et cetera. He said, is your daughter there? I said, yeah. So I have to talk to her to get permission to talk to you. So okay, so I gave it to him. He said, what's your name? What's your birth date? Okay, what's your phone number? Well, she wasn't sure about all of that. Well, what's your house number? She'd been living in that house for 10 years. It's 523. She couldn't remember it. She couldn't remember her Social Security number. So those are all things that really mark whether or not there's a medical issue pushing you.
One more question.
Sure.
In addition to music, doing things like crossword puzzles,
Yes.
either online and other kind of mind games. I do word search, which is just kind of fun. It's just a myriad of letters, and they have a theme like national parks or something, and then you try and find the string of words, the letters that spell that word, and that's kind of fun. I mean, I just
Have you got a computer where you can search for games to delay Alzheimer's?
Oh, okay.
There are so many organizations that are willing to sell you games.
Yeah, right, a lot of them.
And so many organizations that will give you free information about what kind of games. And the computers have all sorts of those games online to play for free.
Yeah, when I play Hearts on my phone, it is interrupted by ads that are saying things like, doctors are positively begging elders to play this game.
Yeah, right.
That's funny.
So,
Oh, there's a question over there?
Oh, Elisa, here you go.
So you said the doctor will refer you to a neurologist. Mom has lost 2 neurologists in the last 3 years because they've retired, they've moved away. She had an appointment in August, I think it was, with one who said that they were leaving the practice. We can't get an appointment again until April with a new neurologist because they just lost one of the neurologists from their practice, and that's it. So there's, as far as I know, there's 1 neurologist in Federal Way right now.
Well, I'll tell you, call the 800 number. And when you call,
Not that one. There you go.
you got yours, right?
You have a mic.
when you call that 800 number, you'll talk to somebody who has been trained to answer the phone like they do on a 911 call. I can handle that call, etc. But if you want more detailed information, I need to refer you someplace. So what you can do is call that 800 number. You tell them you're in Federal Way and you want a diagnosis much sooner than you're getting it right now. And you say, I want a care consultation. Care
That term.
consultation. And that 24-hour has to know exactly what it is you want from that care consultation. Based on that, she will call specialists who will then deal with you on that question. We had a case of we wanted to find out more about what was going on when we were dealing with Anya. And I ended up talking to a guy who showed me all sorts of things that came from conversations with him about what resources are, where you could find a home, et cetera. You say, I need somebody sooner, and see what they do.
If you're concerned, never let your doctor blow it off. Some doctors may just, oh, everybody's got that. Some doctors that are not sensitive or well-educated in this regard are going to try to talk you out of being worried. Don't let them blow you off. My annual is in 3 weeks. And especially if I can't remember those dang 3 words.
We got 3 weeks to prepare.
I plan to share with her, our experience and that it is a concern, and the sooner the better. Yeah, I can still remember. I can still backtrack on where I left my keys. I can still do that. I don't think you've noticed anything, have you? Oh, good. Well, we want to thank you. We proposed to your team that.
The Faith Formation Committee.
Yeah.
Could I have my mic back, please? On the AMBO. Hello, there we go. The Faith Formation Committee, yes.
We proposed to them that we could, if a need is recognized, to have a session particularly about how to train a whole congregation.
And on that topic, Jim asked me to whip up some evaluation forms for you all. So we will hand these out, but I do want to point out for those online that you can also fill out an evaluation by going to the URL I will now give you, so listen closely, tinyurl.com/goodshepeval, tinyurl.com/GOODSHEPEVAL. And I'll hand these out to all of you. It is also on here with a QR code if you'd rather do it electronically later on. But I don't have any pens handy, so I'm hoping some of you might.
And there's some information up there about the Alzheimer's.org, Altswa. That's the local one. And then there is Alts.org nationwide. And then below that is my blog. I'm writing about my daughter and what's going on, called Nevertheless Dementia, We Persist.com. And then Facebook. I have a Facebook about what we're doing and going through. So
Let's have a round of applause for Jim and Carol. Thank you both for being with us. Would you like to close with a prayer? I'm putting you on the spot.
He is putting me on the spot. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Good Shepherd Church, oh God, cares about those with dementia. It's proven its capacity in the case of Anya and David. And so continue to grow us all, continue to grow our awareness, alleviate our discomfort, help us to recognize that you are there present in every person whose mind is failing. We ask especially that you bless those families here who are directly involved with people with dementia. It's not easy. Help them to know that you keep your promises, that you are there, and that you are embracing them in their trials. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Bob and Gay, for dealing with the tech very much.
Bob and Gay, yay!
Hey, way to go. I woke up.